Agency is going to give a stakeholder perspective on a systematic understanding of the water environment, why we need it and the challenges we face. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. So my name is James Finigan. I am from the Environment Agency. I work in the Research and Evidence Directorate, which looks at how we can work with academia to develop capabilities around making better decisions, making those evidence-based, and developing plans for the long term. Oh, better use this. So, whilst you read that, I'm going to tell you roughly what the talk is going to be about, which is, it's basically a call to arms for you guys. I want to give you an example of why a systematic perspective of the environment is really important. I want to tell you what the Environment Agency are doing about that and what we think we need help with, which is that stuff there. So to start with, I want to tell you a story involving this chap. Goes by the name of Barry. He's a fisheries expert up in Yorkshire. He's holding a 22-pound salmon. I have it on good authority that this salmon has spent 2 seasons out in Greenland, which is why it's so big. But the important thing, and the reason that I've brought this picture with me today, is because that salmon was found near Sheffield. And Sheffield is on the River Don, and the River Don is historically what we call a dead river. And I'd like to stand here and give you this really good news story today, because there's been so much development and so much work put into improving the qualities of our rivers. That's why Barry is holding that salmon. And we've seen huge benefits in our rivers nationally. We've got porpoises last year outside the River Thames, outside the Houses of Parliament. We've got otters in way upstream in urban areas that previously have never seen them. And we've done that by a lot of hard work. DEFRA, Environment Agency, together, and a lot of private landowners working to improve these things, water companies particularly. And what we've done is we've seen an environmental problem and we've gone out and addressed it. And it's been really targeted. For example, the sewage treatment works, they're a really big problem. We all use sewage, we all make sewage, and we all flush it down the loo, and it all goes into the river in some form or another. Sometimes when it's flooding, it goes straight in with no kind of abatement. Hopefully, it's cleaned up pretty well. And we spend at the Environment Agency a lot of time and effort making sure that the discharge to the rivers are improving. And they are, which is great news. We've got 1,700 kilometres of English water bodies have enhanced quality. That salmon was from one of those kilometre stretches. Bathing water, I don't know how to do a pointer. Oh, look, there we go, yeah. So, bathing waters. Back in 1995, we had really pretty disastrous bathing water qualities. We've now got really very good bathing water quality. Serious pollution incidents. When there is a flood, the sewage treatment works, discharge all their sewage straight into the rivers. And that's partly because they're not, it's partly because they are overflowing with water. And so the retention just isn't there. We've been working with water companies to improve that, to reduce the amount of discharge and reduce the serious pollution incidents. And that is another really good news story. Huge amounts of improvements there. I do have some statistics, but I'm sure the graphs tell you that in spades. Importantly, this comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of £5 billion water company investment for the next 5 years, and the electricity bill for improving the discharge from the water companies is £9 million a year. Now, when you include phosphorus into the stripping, that £9 million, by the way, that is for removal of nitrate. When you include phosphorus into the removal, into the clean-up of the water, that accounts for over 1% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really big, high energy industry. And it is resulting in us having otters, and it is resulting in us having porpoises outside the Parliament, and it is resulting in Barry holding a big fish. But it's very, very, very intensive in terms of energy, intensive in terms of cost. But, and there is obviously a but, are we making a difference? Are we actually making a difference? Or is it coincidental? Is it coincidental that the major industries in the northern rivers roughly kind of stop producing enormous amounts of terrible stuff going straight into our rivers, roughly at the same time as we've seen massive improvements? This graph shows river quality improvements over the last, since 2009, as you can see. Early improvements in water quality have not continued, as you can see. We've got 3 years here or here of either flatlining or reducing trends. Now, I do apologise for the changes in data. This is one of the problems with long-term data sets, is stuff changes. The goalposts move. And one of the issues that we need to contend with, which I put up at the beginning of the talk, was we need to be able to address how we use variable data. This graph gives me, or suggests to me, 3 questions. Firstly, why aren't we seeing any improvements? Secondly, what do we need to do to address those improvements? And thirdly, is it appropriate to be using 1% of our national greenhouse gas emissions on something that may not be having any effect, especially when we're talking about zero carbon by 2050? The chances are, the reality is, we've probably done the easy wins. We've probably sorted out the stuff that can be addressed just by looking at a single problem and addressing it with a single solution. That stuff's done. And that's why we need a systematic approach. Now, everybody else today has put something up about the 25-year environment plan, so I can't do without that. I'm not going to put up the front cover. These are some quotes. Basically, the need for the systematic understanding is identified within the 25-year environment plan. The lack of a systematic understanding is also identified within the 25-year environment plan. We've probably gone as far as we can with our existing approach of trying to address each symptom on its own. We can't continue to focus on individual systems, on individual symptoms, because pressures are going to increase with climate change and population growth. Managing individual systems is often costly. We saw the cost of the water treatment works. We saw the cost from carbon and actually into your pocket in terms of water rates. Those individual solutions can be counterproductive to other areas of the system. Other people have spoken about that today. And it's too risky in terms of delivering environmental gain. We saw that graph flatlining or possibly reducing. There's unforeseen consequences and there's knock-on impacts. So this time of dealing with a single problem, with a single solution, that's now gone. So the systematic understanding of the water environment, what do we mean by it? This is a sketch which I put together. The blue ovals are areas of the 25-year environment plan which roughly fit within the Environment Agency's remit. I say very roughly, it is. But the important thing I think that I'd like you to understand here is that there's data and evidence on this screen here. Some of those boxes are functions, some of them are evidence, some of them are processes. the whole thing should be, and really is, underpinned by a conceptual understanding of how everything links together. You can call that the system narrative. Each process should have data and evidence that underpins it. Actually, that's a bit sketchy in some places. The majority of it will have really good evidence and really good data that underpin it. Sometimes that's lacking. Creating the system will be about linking these bits of evidence and data together, but we want to do that in such a way that actually links it with that narrative. Because, as others have said today, if you just create a model and you just run that model and you give that model to somebody and say, there you go, all the nuance of that model and all those uncertainties of that model and all the interpretability of that model is lost. The narrative is the bit that gives you that understanding. So the narrative that underpins this needs to be linked to the evidence and the data. And this capability is being developed by the Environment Agency. That's why I'm standing here today. It's called the Sentinel Evidence for Decision Making. I apologise for the name, but I don't have any ability within that field. Sentinel Evidence System. So this is why we have these needs. Again, the 25-year environment plan is there. How will we know if we've delivered it? Actually, the 25-year environment plan's got a lot of needs, a lot of wants. How are we going to know that we're really making a change? Are we just going to collect some evidence, some statistics, which can show you a story, like I showed right at the beginning with these improved water quality with Barry holding the big fish and 1,700 kilometres of improved rivers? Is that enough? We really need a proper systematic understanding of the water environment. Other people have talked about natural capital. This is the language which could link up the system. This is the language which could be used to talk, to associate different parts, different processes within the system. Yes, we need it to detect environmental change in terms of processes, changes in terms of policy change. How has a policy change translated into change on the ground? And we need it to look at the long term in terms of climatic change. What is happening to the environment over the long term? We also need early warnings, emerging trends. We need to be able to look forward. We don't want to be tripped up again by things like metaldehyde. Metaldehyde has been used enormously across the countryside, and now it's creeping into our groundwater. And that has taken decades to happen, and we don't want to be in another situation where we're playing catch up a few decades later. So we need to be able to think ahead so that we don't trip up over environmental problems. Okay, our goal is to have a systems understanding that will allow us to make decisions based on much more complete understanding of our actions. For example, we want it to be national and sub-national scale, so we're talking very large scale here. Long term, we're not really looking at short seasonal changes. We're looking at big national things over very long-term periods. And our understanding should not be the understanding that I or you think. It should be a collaborative understanding rather than a piecemeal or a siloed understanding. If I asked the same question of a number of you, I would get a number of different answers. And the understanding that's within our system should reflect that. That understanding needs to be based on the broader environment. So we're looking at land, water, air, and we're looking at economics and social. That's something which I've heard repeatedly throughout today. And we need to be able to make sure that the measures, the evidence that we're collecting, is the correct evidence to give that story to the system. So at the moment we're collecting a load of evidence, and most of that evidence is based on our legislative requirements. And those legislative requirements may well reflect favourably on the system, but there may be grey areas and there may be gaps. We need to ensure that going forward from here, the stuff that we're collecting is really the right evidence to be able to tell a story of our environment. So, this is what we need help with. Firstly, at the top there, methods for assessing and representing the significance of relationships between different functions of the system. That's basically asking about where and when would policy interventions be most significant. Now, this was brought up by Peter Cox this morning at the beginning of the day. It's really important that significant, the word significant there is really important. There's loads and loads and loads of relationships out there in the environment, and we'll never be able to address them all. We'll never be able to represent them all in this system. We need to have a system that looks at the significant relationships and has a way of being able to represent the significance of those relationships, so that we can target the areas of the system that will really make a change, make a benefit. Natural capital there, halfway down the screen, relating different functions and assets using natural capital as a common language. Some of the aspects and some of the functions within this system are going to be very, very, very different indeed. And it really will be relating apples and pears, and being able to have a common language across those different functions and across those different processes is going to be vitally important. Scalability, somewhere down here. Scalability is really important. Again, whilst I was talking earlier about we want this to be a national, subnational scale, we also have people within the Environment Agency whose entire life is dedicated to that little stretch of river. And actually, that little stretch of river is a very important stretch of river. That area where the salmon was, just downstream of Sheffield, that was a hard-won gain by real people doing real interventions on the ground, making a change. And so this scalability, we need to be able to use this tool or this capability at a national scale so that we can make good policy, but we need to be able to relate that back to that stretch of river. So it needs to be able to talk at a local scale, at a catchment, sub-catchment, farm, sub-stretch of river scale, and at a national scale. And importantly, it needs to be able to tell the same story. And that's where the tricky bit is, because these are going to be different data sets. The data that's used for that little stretch of river is a different data set to the one that's going to be used at a national scale. So that's going to be very hard. Handling different evidence at different resolutions. And resolutions also in terms of time, that was a point that was made earlier, time and spatial scales. Scenario building at the bottom there. Scenario building, the complexity here again is about using different types of evidence to build that scenario. The scenario that I'm talking about is stories going into the future, what if scenarios, gaming theory, and being able to do that using very, very, very different and diverse evidence in a way that makes sense, in terms of natural capital, and enables you to carry on the continuity of that story that you already have from the system. So those are what we need help with. this isn't a talk where I'm going to give you any answers. It's a talk where there's lots of questions and lots of unanswered questions. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Have we got any questions? Yes, lots. That's that.
Yeah, Andrew Clark, National Farmers Union. When you presented, James, you emphasised the components of Sentinel. I feel are very focused on what the Environment Agency are interested in. I saw nothing there about wildlife, landscape, culture, archaeology, and nothing about net zero. So when you present it as an environmental system, it's not, it's an Environment Agency system. And when we, from a farming point of view, need a joined up approach, surely that evidence system should be joining up these and trying to optimise between the different objectives.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The Sentinel evidence system does need to understand the full environment, and we do appreciate that that includes social, economic aspects, economic being agricultural productivity, as well as forestry productivity, social involving heritage aspects as well. We are also aware, the Environment Agency are also aware, that a lot of the policy for agriculture comes from the DEFRA. DEFRA are developing systems tools, and currently working with DEFRA's systems teams in the Chief Scientific Advisor's Office. There will be an understanding within that of the agricultural capabilities within to include heritage capabilities and to include agricultural productivity and the systems and functions that entails.
I was just wondering whether, James, whether you see this as being a single model that can work as different systems, or whether you see this as a general approach, which I guess links to that other question on it being.
I'm not sure yet, Felix. I think that's the honest truth of it. A single model has advantages, but it also has disadvantages, and I think we're steering a careful path in terms of calling it a model or not a model. It is going to be a capability that allows us to make better decisions, and it will have to have a predictive capability. To do that, we need numerical modelling capability, whether it's one model or whether it's a suite that is loosely grouped. I'm not sure yet.
Hi, Rob Holland from Southampton. I'm just interested in this, what you're saying about the scalability, and that you have your, I don't know what they call them now, area teams.
Mm-hmm.
You have the sort of head office.
Yep.
So I sort of work with some of the area people, and they argue that actually where they're operating in their catchments on their rivers, it's in a way it's not about the science in a way. It's all just about the people and what the people think, and all the issues that they deal with are their perceptions of the people about their environment and stuff. So I'm quite interested in terms of your modelling. Where do you see that you sort of are going to stop? What scale do you need to work, or do you need to incorporate some of these ideas we talked about in the morning about sort of agent-based models? Or
yeah, I think there needs to be a pretty healthy degree of acceptance that people are a huge portion of this. Historically, the Environment Agency has been about delivering environmental gain, and there is within the 25-year environment plan, there is more of a recognition that people are an important part of the environment, and decisions that people make need to be recognised and need to be accepted. And that's an awful lot of what the area staff are doing. They're working with people, they're working with communities, and how we balance that very local one-to-one relationship between an officer and a member of the public, which is really vital, and how we marry that up with the strategic long-term policy needs. That's the really tricky part. It can really be helped by having one version of the truth and being transparent and being honest and open. And actually, the transparency and truth in terms of the capabilities that we come up with are going to be vital here, which is why we need that scalability to be right. If we start saying one thing at a strategic level and another thing at a local level, we will lose trust fast.
I can just comment.
Okay, we'll find one.
I'm not sure that the truth is the same on small scale as it is on big scale. I mean, the point is the large scale is an integration of lots of things on the small scales, and the small scales are variable, and there will be a distribution of things. So I'm not sure this requirement for a joined up story is realistic, or even desirable, actually. I'm not sure it's transparent. I'm not even sure it's truthful, because we should be being truthful that the local truth might be different to the global truth.
Yes, I think you're right, and I think as the words came out of my mouth, I knew that somebody was going to go, but what I really meant was you need to be able to tell that story in a logical and a coherent way. Now that might mean that in this location you've got a different thing happening to the national, but you should be able to map one to the other and say that is because da 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 da.
Well, no, the whole point of distributions, though, is that there will be a whole variety of things on these local levels. And actually, I think distributions and understanding the fact that a distribution represents uncertainty and difference is a really difficult thing to communicate to people who are not necessarily quantitative individuals in policy. And that there isn't really a direct story between this outlier and the direct thing. The story is that this contributes to the distribution, and the distribution informs the local. And that's a harder story to tell.
That is, yes, yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to cut this short and we can discuss this further over the wine later.